Richard, please, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Salim, and it's a great pleasure to be part of this amazing conference. To everyone who is participating, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed, great opportunity to be here today. As Salim have already said, we've worked together and we're still continuing to work together on adaptation in the continent, and definitely lessons from the continent could actually be cross-hybridized in Asia and more so South Asia. We are gathering here at a time that is quite very unique. I learned that the word Gobeshona means research, and implication of constant study, learning, and application of knowledge towards achieving the status of an expert. Where I come from, there is a befitting proverb to complement Gobeshona, and it says that where there are experts, there will be no lack of learners. In a setting saturated with experts, like the one we are having today, we must all create an even bigger room in our minds to learn from each other. So I join in today to learn as well as share lessons from the work that we do in the African continent. Because let's face it, at no time in recent history has the quest for solutions called more urgently for a convening of minds than we are seeing today in this conference. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, last year was the start of the decade of action, which is the 10 remaining years to implement the Sustainable Development Goals, the noble goals to guide all of us, regardless of our areas of interest, towards ensuring that there is no one left behind. There is food on every table, more money in more pockets, health opportunities for all, among many other priorities we need for inclusive, competitive, and sustainable societies across the entire globe. But just as the sense of this renewed commitment and urgency for accelerated action for the goals we're gathering pace globally, the COVID-19 global health emergency hit the entire globe. It remains an unprecedented emergency whose impacts cut across literally every aspect of life. As we know, virtual meetings like we are having today have taken on a whole new level of significance, universally having an impact in the entire globe. And this is just one sign of how our lives have been impacted in ways we have never imagined. Our actions in driving locally led adaptation can therefore not be blind to these unprecedented realities. They must instead be exercised in a manner that offers value in solutions to such a challenge. The economic ramifications of this COVID-19 pandemic has exceeded by over 60% the devastation of the historic 2008 global financial crisis. In just 1 year, the globe is losing up to about 700 billion in capital availability. On the critical trade front, the global economy has lost about $6 trillion US, a 50% larger decline than was experienced in 2008. These losses exceed by about $1 trillion US, amount needed to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals globally. When this is taken down to the African continent and other developing regions, including in South Asia, where our host today, Bangladesh, have not escaped this economic devastation. Africa, because of COVID-19, is facing a negative 5.1% GDP growth, a loss of up to about 50% of all jobs, and the first recession in 25 years. Among critical impacts, the South Asia region is facing the worst economic performance in 40 years, with a projected at least half of the countries falling into a deep recession. These COVID-19 induced losses, as we know, are just complicating an already there scenario towards the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals, or are affecting the very regions of the globe that are already facing significant gaps, whether we're talking youth unemployment, like in the case of Africa, over 60% of the entire youthful population are unemployed. So we're talking food insecurity, Like in the case of Africa, 257 million citizens going to bed hungry. Or we're talking low economic productivity, among many other challenges that will only continue to affect the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals. But as we know, these realities are telling us that if we do not adapt our actions in climate to the changing climate to offer solutions to this COVID-19 emergency and catalyze accelerated socioeconomic transformation, we might never be able to ensure that we are safe as well as ensure sustainable transformation for our countries and continent. However, just like we know, this proverb tells us that every adversity carries within it seeds of equal or greater benefit. We have before us a golden opportunity to strategically position locally led adaptation as a driver of solutions, as a source of accessible competitive solutions to rebuild much needed stronger, more inclusive and environmentally sustainable economies under the COVID-19 reality. But the question is, how we can achieve this through the lens of adaptation is the essence of my discussion. And this all starts with the scientific findings on the intersection of climate change and COVID-19. According to the United in Science report, climate change has not stopped for COVID-19. This report made it clear that the global economy remains under dangerous pre-COVID-19 levels of and above 2-degree warming, a scenario that will only exacerbate the worsening climate change projected to shrink economies in developing countries, most of them in Africa and in South Asia, by up to about 75%. These analyses were closely followed by the UNEP Emissions Gap report, which was released in December, just a month ago. The analysis of this report pointed to the fact that the level of ambition in current nationally determined contributions commitment remain inadequate, and as a result, the globe is headed towards a 3.2-degree warming this century, a figure that is way above the 1.5-degree threshold that is critical to forestall the worst impacts of climate change. However, this report did offer a glimmer of hope in what is called a green pandemic recovery, which implies a reprioritization of physical investments in trajectories that lower emissions and at the same time build socioeconomic resilience. And if this is done, emissions can actually be reduced by 25% by 2030 and bring the world closer to the safe 2 degrees goal of the Paris Climate Change Agreement. Just 5 days ago, UNEP released the Global Adaptation Gap report. Launching this report, whose results shows that an increased ambition towards the safer 2 degrees goal would actually be able to limit annual economic growth due to climate change by 1.6. But if we do nothing, and if we follow the current trajectory as we're following today, these losses will increase to 2.2% for the unsafe 3.2 degrees trajectory. This UNEP Global Adaptation Gap report calls for investment in nature-based solutions to drive climate change adaptation. According to this report, a 1.8 trillion investment in adaptation measures will bring a return of about 7.1 trillion in avoided costs to the changing climate and to economic losses. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the question then is the nature-based solutions that we know about, what really are they? We know that these are locally appropriate actions that address societal challenges such as climate change, that provide human well-being and biodiversity benefits by sustainably managing and restoring these ecosystems. But within these nature-based solutions, there is the ecosystem-based adaptation. It's all encompassed in these, which is working with nature, not against nature. And examples are dotted across the entire African continent. In the critical agricultural sector, for example, whether we're talking about fertilizer that actually replaces chemical fertilizer to improve soil organic matter, we're talking infrastructure development where we prioritize green stormwater control strategies like planting mangroves. All these examples do exist. They exist across the continent. These do exist, but they do exist in silos. And going forward in the context of our discussion today, 2 fundamental questions remain that we need to answer. given that the core of vulnerability, especially in the African continent and South Asia, and even across the entire globe, is socioeconomics. And we know that climate change, despite the fact that it is global, it is the poor people who are disproportionately vulnerable because they lack the resources they need to afford the goods and services to buffer against the worst impacts of climate change. And the question then becomes, how can nature-based solutions, especially in this case, the ecosystem-based adaptation, be applied as a generator of enterprise opportunities that not only provide environmental benefits, but also ensures economic and financial dividends? And the second question is related to this first question, which is how can we leverage locally led adaptation actions to ensure that nature-based solutions, and more so the ecosystem-based adaptation, become the bedrock of the much-needed green pandemic recovery that attract adaptation financing? Based on the lessons learned across the continent, the answer to these fundamental questions lies in what we call enablers of sustainability. When you look at the African continent, and more so the same in South Asia, informal sector constitute the bulk of the population. About 80% of the informal sector create jobs for the continent. They're already applying these nature-based solutions across the continent. EBA are responsible for the pocket of successes we are seeing. But we know that when they're guided from the work that we do to integrate nature-based solutions as an investment opportunity and a source of enterprising actions that unlock social, economic, and financial dividends, they will become investors, both financially and otherwise, towards upscaling these nature-based solutions. This same approach is replicable in South Asia, where more than 80% of all workers engage in informal activities. Over 90% of the region businesses are also informal. The actions of such informal sector actors who integrate nature-based solutions into their enterprises and unlock opportunities, as well as generate empirical data, can then be feedback to convincingly inform policy prioritization. And this brings in the second enabler, which is policy. And I am specifically talking of policy positions that are informed by empirical successes from the national level through national climate change policies, the nationally determined contribution revisions that are currently ongoing at the moment in countries, to national adaptation planning, and to regional and global policies through structures like in the case of African Ministerial Conference on the Environment, to the UN Environment Assembly. All these policies need to be informed empirically by what has been proven to work. This is where success stories of local adaptation action play a significant role. We saw this play out during the first UNIA in 2014 that resulted to the adoption of Resolution 7 on ecosystems-based adaptation to get the support of most of the African negotiators to push EBA at the global level, to convincing through this empirical evidence from the actions that have happened on the ground. And for these data on empirical successes of multidimensional benefits of nature-based solutions across over time were used to make the case. Whether we're talking examples in Togo, where simple rehabilitation of catchment areas was shown to drive renewal of dam water levels, resulting in water availability, incentivizing local communities to expand farming, especially tomato farming, that did not only reduce poverty, but resulted in them earning up to about $30,000 per year. Or Seychelles, where rainwater harvesting actually helping reducing not only savings in water by up to about $250 a month, but resulted in a legislation ensuring that rainwater harvesting be integrated into every building code. Or to Malawi, where EBA techniques of conservation agriculture, including agroforestry, are resulting in restoration of over 15,000 hectares. Or Mozambique, where investment of just $120 per person to rehabilitate depleted mangroves are resulting in not only restoring mangroves, but also helping create economic opportunities. And the least of these actions, pockets of successes from Kenya to Niger, are actually providing not just lessons, but at the same time showcasing the nature-based solutions are not only environmentally, socially, and financially viable, but at the same time can actually build resilience of communities. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, these local actions, locally led adaptation actions that took place over several years provided much needed empirical evidence to solidify a body of knowledge to convince policymakers and negotiators towards supporting the groundbreaking UNEA resolution at the global level, the decision that cleared a path for EBA to be considered not only as a tool for adaptation, but as a critical enabler to driving the realization of inclusive growth. But clearing the path only goes so far. In today's market-driven economies, sustaining this relevance calls for a foolproof demonstration of the socio-economic benefits of EBA, where actions unlock not just climate and environmental benefit, but also socio-economic and financial dividends. And this led to one fundamental aspect we cannot ignore, which is that to effectively upscale nature-based solutions, we cannot be oblivious to the fact that currently these locally led adaptations are happening most of the time in silos. This logic was solidified at the Third United Nations Environment Assembly, where members states adopted a groundbreaking resolution titled Investing in Innovative Environmental Solutions for Accelerating the Implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. This resolution was founded on the basis that upscaling nature-based solutions, innovative environmental solutions, including ecosystem-based adaptation, cannot be undertaken in silos, but calls for enablers to ensure it unlocks socio-economic opportunities. EBA must therefore become part of a composite solution towards unlocking tangible socio-economic benefits, primarily food security, increase in incomes, and creating enterprise opportunities, especially for the youth, who majority of them are unemployed, and achieving this call for specific principles, which I will share with you today, and which we are undertaking in driving adaptation solutions and bringing impact to scale across the continent. And these principles are tied together by connecting the dots approach. And the first principle is leverage mitigation to power adaptation. EBA on its own has recorded successes, pockets of successes across the continent and elsewhere, but to progress to broader solutions that underpin a green pandemic recovery, with not only food security enhanced, but environment enhanced and more money put in more pockets, especially of the informal sector people, on what they produce using EBA or nature-based. These must be done in such a way that we do not pile emissions, but at the same time ensure that value is added to what is produced. And for this, clean energy, which is a mitigation action, should be prioritized for powering value-added actions. And it is in adding value that opportunities will be created, especially for the informal sector. And of critical importance, however, is the fact that value addition does not need to start on a very sophisticated scale. Rather, local solutions accessible to the informal sector work best. If you take, for example, just a decentralization of a simple climate action solution of solar dryers to farmers in local markets to enable them to dehydrate and preserve their harvests that remain unsold at the end of the day and sell when demand peaks. This has proven not only to cut post-harvest losses, but increase earnings of these communities and informal sector people by up to 30 times. And the scalability of this approach is multiplied, especially when you look across the entire African continent, for example, witnessing $48 billion getting down the drain every year as a result of post-harvest losses. It tells us that if we apply nature-based solutions alone, we will not be able to reduce these post-harvest losses. And this will disincentivize nature-based solutions applications. And if we combine it with clean energy for value addition, we will be on track to tap into billion-dollar worth of value-added enterprises. And this takes me to the second principle, which is unlocking niche markets, leveraging on EBA nature-based solutions. There is a growing market segment of consumers ready to pay up to about 3 times the price of conventional food for food that is certified organically, for food that is healthy and environmentally compliant. And with increased public knowledge between the link of what we eat With our health, consumers the world over are becoming more sophisticated and picky of their food choices. They are opting more for natural food that can be validated as having been produced in a non-chemicalized, non-artificial way. And this is a niche for nature-based solution, especially ecosystem-based adaptation, to explore by being premised as a solution to help producers achieve this compliance. Through working with National Bureau of Standards across countries, we are seeing nature-based solutions, especially EBA, being adopted as an affordable, as an effective technique to recommend to producers who want to achieve health, safety, and organic compliance, where food cultivated using nature-based solutions and produced using clean energy gets certified as organic to offer producer legitimacy and a higher premium in the market. We see this in Uganda. Uganda National Bureau of Standards, working together with UNEP, have developed a market incentive that integrates and incorporates EBA and clean energy as recommended techniques towards meeting food safety, health, quality, and environmental sustainability benchmark. The same is happening in Nigeria. That has resulted in integrating approaches as critical techniques, especially EBA, to meet this environmental compliance as well as safety. And that takes me to the third principle, which is to drive locally led adaptation. Leveraging on these nature-based solutions, we cannot ignore the reality that faces especially the informal sector where the bulk of the population is based. While up to about 90%, especially in the continent of Africa, 90% of Africans in the informal sector operate outside the mainstream banking systems. Most are members of communal cooperatives that are weaved into the community culture. These are mostly small-scale saving groups. In the African continent, out of every 100 people, including children and the elderly, at least 7 are members of a cooperative. In some countries, cooperatives are responsible for 45% of the gross domestic product and 31% of national saving in most of these countries. The big question, therefore, is how can these systems be leveraged to finance upscaling of locally led adaptation solutions? The answer lies in what we call cooperating around solutions. What we are seeing with the work we do in the continent is that actors already using nature-based solutions can be structurally guided to convene and cooperate around solutions where they assess a solution, where they assess a value addition accessory like a solar dryer. And using this accessory, they reduce their post-harvest losses. They increase their earnings up to 30 times, and this enables them to increase their savings in these local cooperatives. And they can then be able to afford to invest and expand the application of locally led adaptations like EBA. This forms a virtuous cycle of savings and investment by informal sectors that results in upscaling nature-based solutions as well as locally led adaptation. And that takes me to the fourth point. The reality is you can only build on your strengths. And if you ignore your strength, then definitely you cannot be able to succeed. In South Asia and in the African continent, the youthful population cannot be ignored. It is the human capital, the strength that can be leveraged not only to drive locally led adaptation, but devise innovative solutions that can take adaptation to a higher level. We know that investing in youth by structurally guiding them to continuously improve, to continuously refine and adapt their skills and talents, tap into their passions and energy and creativity, and make them not only to drive this action, but also find a purpose to do it because they know that it is the best thing to do to build resilience of community. And this way, we will not only be able to create enterprises that are bringing nature-based solutions to scale, but this will also become a formidable strategy to drive locally led adaptation. And this is what we are doing through an approach called innovative volunteerism in the continent, engaging willing youth through the ecosystem-based adaptation for food security assembly framework called EBAFOSA. But what we have seen is that this applies with direct and indirect impacts. Under direct impacts, you train in turning agricultural waste to biofertilizer, providing accessible organic fertilizer solutions to substitute the costly chemical fertilizers. And by doing so, they have registered over 560% in profit to establish an enterprise pool for increased nature-based solutions investment. But for indirect impacts, focus has been on providing value addition solutions to producers using EBA approaches to enable them to add value and preserve their harvests. And by this, incentivize them to produce more and hence apply more locally led nature-based solutions. Accordingly, you would have been guided to develop mechanical solar dryers using locally available material. These dryers are proven not only to produce effectively, to dry effectively below the 12% moisture threshold set in national standard bureaus, but at the same time, they're also proving that they are 48 times faster in drying while ensuring hygiene to increase affordability. We are seeing young people not only decentralizing the solar dryers, but they're constituting what is called solar drying center. They're creating their own enterprises. These are designated communal areas where they're engaging communities to pay as you go in these solar drying centers, and these are creating opportunities and jobs for these young people. The point is, you cannot be able to drive locally led adaptation without incentivizing the youth to leverage on their talents and skills and their ingenuity to drive affordable solutions that can act as enablers to bring adaptation and impact to scale. And that takes me to the fifth point, which is innovations in finance. What is clear in Africa is that there is no lack of innovations in policy. What is clear in Africa is that there is no lack of policies per se. If you take, for example, nearly all countries in the continent have climate-smart agricultural policies that directly relate to EBA and nature-based solutions. Nearly all countries have these policies in all the enablers we've discussed, be it whether we're talking clean energy policies, such as feed-in tariffs, or we're talking about finance policies. Nearly all these countries have robust national standard bodies. However, the gap lies in implementation. The gap lies in implementation, and this is because these policies are mostly not empirically informed by proven enterprise actions that are already working on the ground. And by this, ensure they can be more targeted in incentivizing successes so they become the mainstream. Through the work we are doing in the continent, we are convening grand enterprise actors that integrate nature-based solutions and more so EBA into their work to share empirical data on the financial, market, environmental, and social benefits of their action, as well as the gaps they need addressed to sustain and upscale these successes. This data is then shared with policy experts across diverse relevant sectors through policy harmonization and coherent committees for implementation, which we have worked with countries to put in place so they can include nature-based solutions from a practical and implementable way. Through these committees, policy experts from diverse ministries, Ministry of Environment, Energy, Agriculture, Finance, Ministry of Youth, and so on and so forth in countries are taking up these lessons to inform policy implementation based on lessons and empirical data from successful, coherent climate adaptation actions on the ground that integrate not only clean energy solutions, but integrate nature-based approaches. An example of data showing the benefits of these EBA actions in increasing yields, leveraging from the solar dryers that have been decentralized, and showcasing that the informal sector producers who are using this to recalibrate and dry their food within the National Food Safety and Food Production Standard codes, this data is actually being uptake. And this approach has proven not only to be popular and bringing nature-based actions into different ministries that may not necessarily be concerned with adaptation, but it's showing that it is the best way to ensure pro-nature-based policy actions taking up in different policy arena. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, an insightful African proverb reminds us that family names blossom in clusters. The good name of nature-based solutions will only blossom further if we diverge from considering it as a silo undertaking and integrate it as part of a composite solution towards driving the green pandemic recovery and achieving competitive socio-economic opportunities. Let nature-based solutions and more so adaptation not only be a household name among us, but rather let it be the answer for climate action and transformational development. And let our efforts in this go-bation be informed by this fundamental principle. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard, for that wonderful tour de force, I would say, of what you are doing in Africa. I'm a great admirer, as you know.